My son's beloved teacher was caught with him in a bush, and when I started taking action against her, she weaponized CPS against me. So I leaked her hidden camera roll and watched her tenure shatter, pulling the most devastating revenge possible. I was at the store when I realized I was a few minutes late to pick up my son from his school trip, but by the time I got there, his teachers told me someone else had already collected him, and that someone was the ambulance. My heart twisted, and his teacher's face looked ghost white too. A million questions started pouring out of my mouth. In response, she didn't say anything, just put her hand on my shoulder. No one else was around, and she lowered her voice until it was barely a whisper. Take your son out of this school while you still can. And before I could say anything else, she brought over the main teacher to tell me what hospital my son was at. It was a 10-minute drive, but I made it in 5. And when I got there, Mikey was being wheeled to the ICU. His eyes were closed, and I could barely see the rest of his tiny self through the flood of nurses. That's when a police officer came up to me and brought me into the nearby police station. Talk about a wild goose chase. He asked me if I ever watched Korn on my phone. I furrowed my eyebrows, and once the confusion wore off, a rage boiled my blood. It felt like some sort of sick joke. But then Dave, the officer, took a deep breath. Sir, please answer the question, he said, keeping his face straight and his voice assertive. I shook my head. How the F is this? But I was interrupted, not by him talking over me, but by the sight of tears in his eyes. I've been in this job for 25 years, and still any case involving youngins still makes me cry, he said between sobs. That's when I knew that he took his job seriously, and something very wrong had happened. Well, I didn't want to stop him from oversharing more details than he probably should, so I stayed completely silent. Your son was found in a bush with one of the teachers. A passerby noticed. What the F were they doing? I asked. Dave pursed his lips, realizing that he had shared more of the case than he was allowed. So I threw my phone down on the table in front of us and pointed at my lock screen. This is my little boy. I promised myself a long time ago that I'd do anything to keep him safe. You can tell me anything. Dave glanced at the picture frame on the table of his own kids and nodded. A passerby called and said your son was jerking it in the bush with Miss Waters, but Miss Waters claimed your son has just been watching too much Korn. I felt the color drain from my face. Suddenly, everything made sense. Up until this point, my son was coming home every day raving about a new crush, about how she was buying things for him, how smart and mature she was. I never knew that crush was a grown adult, but it still didn't explain why my son was in the hospital. And that's when Dave kept going. Apparently when they got caught, my son hit himself over the head with a rock. I quickly put the pieces together. You see, my son is the type of person to watch you get caught by the police and take the blame for it. And that's exactly what happened here. He must have seen it as an act of love. Suddenly the room was spinning, and I buried my head in my hands. I thought back to what that assistant teacher told me. Dave promised that he and his team would do everything they could. I knew by the look in his eyes that he meant what he said. The next few hours were hell. I spent the entire night in the waiting room, wondering if my son had just sacrificed his life for a kitty fiddler or not. And I had to keep my promise to Officer Dave, so even though I texted into the parents' WhatsApp group chat, I kept it super vague, just gave the details most people already knew. But still, my phone was blowing up with texts from the other moms and dads. You see, my son was attending an all-boys school, and all the texts were about creepy things they had seen Miss Waters get away with. One dad told me that his son's grades were getting bumped up in exchange for a daily hug when no one was looking. Another mom told me that one day when her child still hadn't walked home from school, she went to pick him up. And in the classroom, she caught Miss Waters with only 2 of her blouse buttons done up, revealing her cleavage to her son. So by the time the surgeons told me my son was okay, I was seeing red. He was resting, but they told me he'd make a full recovery. I was sitting beside him waiting for him to wake up when a visitor walked in. It was Miss effing Waters. She draped herself over his unconscious self, and I wanted to wrap the IV drip around her neck until she couldn't breathe. But unfortunately, that was illegal. So instead, I gave her a huge hug. You see, I instantly caught sight of her phone in her back pocket, and I had already vowed to myself to do everything I could to have her locked up. So after I got it, I asked her if I could meet her by the vending machine. She said yes, and as soon as she left, I unlocked her phone. The password was my son's birthday, and in the camera roll were dozens of folders, all named after different kids in his class. Some were innocent, just them on sports day and other school events. Others were very much not. Kids in janitors' closets, in classrooms when the school was empty, all performing acts I don't even want to describe. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through folder after folder. Each one had a date range next to the kid's name. Some went back months. I felt sick to my stomach, but I kept going, taking screenshots of everything. The evidence was overwhelming, and I knew I had to act fast before she came back. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly locked her phone, slipping it back into her bag just as she walked in. She smiled at me, that same fake, concerned smile she'd probably given to dozens of parents. I forced myself to smile back, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. Everything okay? She asked, glancing at Mikey, who was still unconscious. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She sat down next to me, placing her hand on my arm. I had to fight the urge to pull away. You know, Mikey is such a special boy, she said softly. He's always been so mature for his age. The way she said it made my skin crawl. I clenched my jaw and forced out a response. Yeah, he's a good kid. She squeezed my arm. I just want you to know that I care about him deeply. Whatever that passerby thought they saw, it wasn't what it looked like. Mikey he gets confused sometimes. Kids these days with all that internet access. I wanted to tell her to shut up. I wanted to show her the screenshots I'd just taken, but I knew I had to play this smart, so I just nodded again. I should probably go, she said after a few minutes of awkward silence. But please, call me if you need anything. Anything at all. After she left, I immediately opened my phone and started airdropping everything to myself. Every single photo, every folder name, every date. My storage was almost full by the time I finished, but I didn't care. This was evidence that could protect not just my son, but every other kid in that school. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Mikey woke up briefly around 3 a.m., confused and scared. I held his hand and told him everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure if that was true. He asked about Miss Waters, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from telling him what I really thought about her. By morning, my phone was buzzing non-stop. The parent group chat had exploded overnight. More stories were coming out. One mom said her son had been staying after school for extra tutoring 3 times a week. Another dad mentioned finding love notes in his son's backpack that he thought were from a classmate, but now realized the handwriting looked suspiciously adult. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I needed help, and I needed it fast. So I sent a message to the group. Can we meet? Not at school. My place, tonight at 7. It's important. The responses came quickly. 6 parents confirmed they'd be there. I spent the day preparing, organizing the evidence, making copies of everything. I also called in sick to work. There was no way I could focus on anything else right now. That afternoon, Miss Waters texted me. Hi, just checking in on you and Mikey. I'm so worried about him. The school board is asking me all these questions and I don't know what to tell them. I was hoping you could vouch for me. You know how much I care about your son. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Of course, you've always been so good to him. Let me know if you need anything. Her response was immediate. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me. These accusations are destroying me. I've dedicated my life to these boys. Yeah, I thought bitterly. That's exactly the problem. The parents arrived at my house right on time. Chris and his wife Samantha were first, followed by Kit and Sama. We gathered in my living room, and I could see the worry on everyone's faces. Before I start, I said, I need everyone to promise that what I'm about to show you stays in this room for now. We need to be smart about this. They all nodded, and I pulled out my laptop. I'd organized everything into a presentation, keeping it clinical and factual despite how much I wanted to rage. As I clicked through the evidence, I watched their faces change from confusion to horror to fury. Samantha was the first to break. She ran to my bathroom, and we could hear her being sick. Chris followed her, his face pale. Kit had tears streaming down his face, while Sama sat frozen, staring at the screen. How long? Chris asked, his voice barely a whisper. Based on the dates, at least 6 months, maybe longer. We need to go to the police right now, Chris said when he came back, Samantha leaning heavily on his arm. With what? I asked. Screenshots from a phone I accessed without permission? She'll have wiped everything by now. It'll be our word against hers, and she's got tenure. She's been there for 8 years. Who do you think they'll believe? So what do we do? Kit asked. I'd been thinking about this all day. We need to be strategic. First, we talk to our sons, gently. Get them to open up about what's been happening. Document everything. Then we start pulling them out of school, one by one. Make up different excuses, so it doesn't look coordinated. What about the other kids? Sama asked. The ones whose parents aren't here? We'll have to figure that out as we go. But right now, we need to protect our own kids first. The meeting went on for hours. We made a plan, exchanged numbers, created a separate group chat that was encrypted. By the time everyone left, it was past midnight, but I felt like we finally had a direction. The next few days were a careful Davesy. Miss Waters kept texting me, playing the victim. She sent long messages about how misunderstood she was, how the other teachers were jealous of her rapport with the students, how the school board was on a witch hunt. I played along, offering sympathy and support while secretly documenting everything. Meanwhile, the other parents were having quiet conversations with their sons. The boys were reluctant to talk at first, but slowly, pieces of the truth started coming out. Nothing explicit, thank God, but enough concerning behavior to confirm our worst fears. Inappropriate comments, too long hugs, special privileges for certain students. Then, out of nowhere, I got a knock on my door. A woman in a suit stood there with a clipboard. Mr. Johnson, I'm from Child Protective Services. We've received a report of emotional neglect concerning your son, Mikey. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly who had made that report. This is obviously a misunderstanding, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My son is in the hospital recovering from an injury. I've been with him every day. She nodded, making notes. I'll need to verify that, of course, and I'll need to speak with Mikey when he's feeling better. This is just a preliminary visit, but I want you to know that we take all reports seriously. After she left, I called Chris immediately. She's trying to get ahead of us, I said. She's going on the offensive. Then we need to move faster, he replied. I agreed. That night, I called in a favor from an old friend who worked in data recovery. I sent him the airdropped files, explaining the situation. He promised to see what he could do about creating a verifiable chain of evidence. By the end of the week, 3 families had pulled their kids from the school. The official reasons varied: moving for work, switching to homeschooling, family emergencies, but the pattern was starting to draw attention. The principal called a meeting with Miss Waters to discuss the concerning trend. I volunteered to attend as a parent representative. It was risky, putting myself in the same room as her again, but I needed to see how she'd play this. The meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. I spent the weekend preparing, going over everything with the other parents, making sure we were all on the same page. Mikey was doing better, physically at least. The emotional healing would take much longer. Sunday night, Miss Waters texted me again. I'm so nervous about tomorrow's meeting. Would you mind putting in a good word for me? I feel like you're the only parent who really understands me. I typed back, don't worry, I'll be there. And I would be, just not in the way she expected. Monday morning came faster than I expected. I dressed carefully, choosing my most professional outfit. If I was going to face her in that meeting, I needed every psychological advantage I could get. The school looked different somehow. Maybe it was knowing what had been happening within those walls. I signed in at the front desk, my hand steady, despite the churning in my stomach. The secretary gave me a sympathetic smile. News of Mikey's hospitalization had spread through the school community. The meeting was in the principal's office. When I walked in, Miss Waters was already there, tissues in hand, eyes red-rimmed. She'd clearly been crying, or at least making it look like she had. The principal, Mr. Henderson, Henderson, sat behind his desk, looking uncomfortable. Two school board members flanked him. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Johnson," the principal said. "We appreciate having parent representation during this difficult time." I nodded and took the seat furthest from Miss Waters. She glanced at me with what I'm sure she thought was a vulnerable expression. I gave her a small, encouraging smile. "Play the part," I told myself. "As you know," Mr. Henderson began, "we've had an unusual number of withdrawals from Miss Waters' class. 3 families in 1 week. Given the recent incident with your son, we wanted to address any concerns." Miss Waters dabbed at her eyes. "I just don't understand what's happening. I've given everything to these boys, and now parents are pulling them out like I'm some kind of monster." One of the board members, a woman with steel gray hair, leaned forward. "Miss Waters, can you think of any reason parents might be uncomfortable?" "The only thing I can think of," she said, voice trembling, "is that terrible misunderstanding with Mikey. But Mr. Johnson knows that was blown out of proportion, don't you?" All eyes turned to me. This was the moment. I could expose everything, or I could play along and wait for a better opportunity. I thought of my son in that hospital bed, of all those folders on her phone, of the other boys who might still be at risk. "Actually," I said slowly, "I think parents are just being extra cautious after what happened. It's natural to worry." Miss Waters' face relaxed slightly. She thought I was on her side. "But," I continued, "I do think it might help if we implemented some new policies. Maybe no one-on-one time between teachers and students, and perhaps teachers should keep classroom doors open during any after-school activities." The principal nodded thoughtfully. "Those seem like reasonable precautions." Miss Waters' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, whatever makes parents feel comfortable. Though I worry such policies might make it harder to give students the individual attention they need. I'm sure we can find a balance," I said pleasantly. The meeting continued for another hour. Miss Waters put on an Oscar-worthy performance, the dedicated teacher being persecuted for caring too much. By the end, the board members seemed satisfied that the withdrawals were just coincidence. As we filed out, Miss Waters caught my arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "I knew I could count on you." I patted her hand, fighting the urge to recoil. "Of course, we both want what's best for the kids." As soon as I got to my car, I texted the parent group. "Meeting went as expected. She's playing victim. We need to move faster." The responses were immediate. 2 more families committed to pulling their kids by the end of the week. But we needed more than that. We needed concrete evidence that couldn't be dismissed. That afternoon, I visited Mikey in the hospital. He was sitting up, coloring in a book one of the nurses had brought him. When he saw me, his face lit up, then immediately fell. "Dad, is Miss Waters in trouble because of me?" I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. "Why would you think that, buddy?" "She texted me," he said quietly. "Said people were being mean to her and it was my fault." My blood boiled. She was texting my son? I kept my voice calm. "Can I see the messages?" He handed me his phone reluctantly. The messages were there, sent from a number I didn't recognize. They were carefully worded, nothing explicitly inappropriate, but the manipulation was clear. She was making him feel guilty, responsible for her problems. I screenshotted everything and forwarded them to my lawyer friend who'd been advising our parent group. This was a violation of school policy at minimum. Teachers weren't supposed to have students' personal numbers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those other boys, the ones whose parents didn't know yet. How many were getting similar messages? How many were being manipulated into silence? Tuesday morning brought a new development. Chris called me, panic in his voice. She showed up at my house, said she wanted to clear the air about why we were pulling Jeremy out of school. What did you tell her? Nothing. I didn't even open the door, but she stood on my porch for 20 minutes, calling through the door about how she just wanted to help. This was escalating. She was getting desperate, which made her devigerous. I called an emergency meeting for that evening. Only this time, we had unexpected company. When the parents started arriving at my house, I noticed a car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. Through the window, I could see someone watching. "Change of plans," I texted quickly. "Meet at the coffee shop on 5th Street instead." We regrouped at the coffee shop, huddled in a back corner. The paranoia was setting in, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. We needed to be careful. "She's panicking," Kit said. "My son told me she pulled him aside yesterday, asked if his parents were angry with her." "Mine too," Sama added. "She offered to tutor him for free if we'd reconsider pulling him out." I shared Mikey's texts, and the mood grew even more somber. We were dealing with someone who wasn't going to go quietly. Wednesday brought the next blow. I got a call from the hospital saying there had been an administrative error with Mikey's records. They needed me to come in and verify some information. When I arrived, I found out someone had called claiming to be from our insurance company, trying to get details about Mikey's admission. The hospital staff couldn't tell me much, but I knew. She was fishing for information, trying to find something she could use against me. That afternoon, my data recovery friend called with news. He'd managed to establish that the files I'd sent him had been created on a school device. Metadata showed they'd originated from Miss Waters' classroom computer. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was something. I was driving home when I noticed the same car from Tuesday following me. I took a few random turns, and it stayed with me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Was she having me followed, or was I being paranoid? I pulled into a busy parking lot and waited. The car drove past without stopping. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the stress was getting to me. Thursday morning, everything changed. I woke up to find my car tires slashed. All 4 of them. No note, no obvious evidence, but I knew. The message was clear. She could get to me whenever she wanted. I called the police to file a report. The officer who came out was sympathetic but honest. "Without evidence, there's not much we can do. You have any idea who might have done this?" I wanted to scream her name, but I knew how that would sound. Paranoid parent blaming a teacher with no proof. So I just shook my head and accepted the report number. Chris drove me to the hospital to see Mikey. When we arrived, the nurses informed me that someone had been calling, claiming to be a family member checking on him. They'd followed protocol and hadn't given out any information, but it was unsettling. "We need to end this," Chris said as we sat in the hospital cafeteria. "She's escalating." "I know, but we need to be smart about it. If we move too fast without solid evidence, she'll spin it as a witch hunt. That evening, I got an email that made my blood run cold. It was from an anonymous address, but I knew who'd sent it. The subject line read, "You should be more careful." The email contained a single attachment, a photo of me at the coffee shop with the other parents. The message was clear. She was watching us. I forwarded it immediately to our lawyer friend and the parent group. The responses were swift and panicked. She was trying to intimidate us into backing down, but she'd made a mistake. The photo had been taken from inside the coffee shop, and in the reflection of the window, you could just make out the photographer. It was blurry, but it was something. Friday arrived with an unexpected ally. I was at the hospital when one of Mikey's nurses pulled me aside. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she said quietly, "but that woman who's been visiting, she makes my skin crawl. The way she talks about your son, it's not right." "What do you mean?" She glanced around nervously. "She keeps calling him her special boy, asking when he'll be released, wanting to know if he's said anything about her. I've started documenting it in my notes." This was huge. A neutral third party witnessing concerning behavior. I thanked her and asked if she'd be willing to write a statement. She agreed. That afternoon, the principal called. "Mr. Johnson, I wanted to give you a heads up. Miss Waters has requested a formal meeting with the school board. She's claiming harassment from a group of parents." My stomach dropped. She was going on the offensive, trying to paint herself as the victim before we could act. "When's the meeting?" I asked. "Monday afternoon. You're welcome to attend as a parent representative again." I thanked him and immediately called an emergency meeting with our group. We had the weekend to prepare, and we needed to make it count. Saturday was a flurry of activity. Parents gathering statements from their sons, documenting every inappropriate interaction they could remember. Our lawyer friend worked on organizing everything into a coherent presentation. My data recovery contact managed to extract more metadata from the files, strengthening the connection to Miss Waters. But she wasn't idle either. Saturday evening, Samantha called in tears. She sent a letter to my employer, said I was harassing her and it was affecting my work performance. The gloves were off. She was trying to destroy us before we could expose her. Sunday brought the biggest shock yet. I was at the hospital with Mikey when my phone rang. It was Dave, the officer who'd first interviewed me. "Mr. Johnson, I need you to come to the station. There's been a development." My heart raced as Chris drove me there. Had they found something? Were we finally going to get justice? But when I arrived, Dave's face was grim. "Someone's filed a complaint against you. Says you've been stalking them, accessing their personal property without permission." I knew immediately who'd filed it. "This is retaliation," I said. "She's trying to discredit me." Dave sighed. "I believe you, but I have to follow procedure. Can you tell me about any interactions you've had with Miss Waters recently?" I chose my words carefully, explaining about the parent meetings and the evidence we'd gathered. Dave took notes, his expression growing more concerned. "Off the record," he said when I finished, "be careful. I've seen this before. When predators feel cornered, they get divedgerous." I left the station feeling shaken, but more determined than ever. Tomorrow's board meeting would be our chance. We had to make it count. Sunday night, I sat with Mikey as he slept. His bruises were fading, but I knew the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. I thought about all the other boys in those folders, all the parents who had no idea what their children had endured. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Last chance. Drop this or lose everything." I deleted it without responding. She'd already taken too much. From my son, from all those boys. Tomorrow, one way or another, this would end. The parent group chat was active all night. Everyone was nervous but ready. We'd compiled statements, evidence, testimonies. Kit had even managed to get one of the school janitors to agree to speak about things he'd seen but hadn't reported. As Monday dawned, I felt a strange calm. We'd done everything we could. Now it was time to face her, to stand up for our children and all the others who couldn't speak for themselves. I arrived at the school early, wanting to touch base with the other parents before the meeting. But as I pulled into the parking lot, I saw something that made my heart sink. Miss Waters was already there, surrounded by a group of teachers and parents. She was crying, gesturing dramatically. I could see some of them nodding sympathetically. She was rallying support, painting herself as the victim of a parent vendetta. This was going to be harder than we thought. I checked my phone. The other parents were already inside, texting me updates. The board meeting was in the main conference room, and apparently Miss Waters had brought a lawyer. Of course she had. I walked in to find the room packed. Parents, teachers, board members, even some reporters from the local paper. Miss Waters sat at the front table, tissues in hand, her lawyer whispering in her ear. She dressed conservatively. Long sleeves, high neckline, minimal makeup, playing the part of the persecuted teacher. Mr. Henderson called the meeting to order. The atmosphere was tense. I could see Chris and Samantha in the back row, Kit near the window. We'd agreed to spread out, make it less obvious we were working together. Miss Waters' lawyer stood first. He was exactly what you'd expect. Expensive suit, practiced smile, the kind of guy who probably defended worse people than her. He launched into a speech about harassment, defamation, and the coordinated attack on his client's reputation. I watched Miss Waters dab at her eyes as he spoke. She'd glance around the room, making eye contact with her supporters, playing up the victim angle. When her lawyer mentioned the baseless accusations stemming from one misunderstood incident, I saw several teachers nodding along. Then it was our turn. The board had agreed to hear from concerned parents. I stood up, my prepared notes in hand, but before I could speak, Miss Waters' lawyer objected. "Mr. Johnson has a clear bias," he said. "His son was involved in the initial incident. Perhaps we should hear from a more neutral party." The board members conferred. I sat back down, jaw clenched, but then Kit stood up. "I'll speak," he said. His voice was steady, calm. "My son hasn't been directly involved in any incidents, but I have concerns." The lawyer couldn't object to that. Kit walked to the front, pulled out his phone, and connected it to the projector. The room went silent as he began showing screenshots. Not the explicit ones. We'd agreed those were too much for a public meeting, but the text messages, the documented pattern of after-school meetings, the gifts. Miss Waters' support started wavering. withdrawing. I could see it in their faces. Teachers exchanging glances, parents shifting uncomfortably. This wasn't just one incident anymore. Then Kit played his ace. "This is a recording from last Tuesday," he said. My son's phone was in his pocket when Miss Waters approached him. The audio was muffled but clear enough. Miss Waters' voice, asking Kit's son if his parents were upset with her, offering private tutoring, suggesting they could work something out if he convinced his parents not to withdraw him from school. The room erupted, parents shouting questions, board members demanding explanations, Miss Waters' lawyer trying to object over the noise, but the damage was done. Mr. Henderson called for order. When the room finally quieted, he turned to Miss Waters. "Do you have an explanation for this?" She stood up, tears streaming down her face. "These parents have taken everything out of context," she said. "I care about my students. Maybe too much, but I've never done anything inappropriate." That's when I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I stood up and walked to the front, ignoring her lawyer's protests. "I have something to add," I said. I pulled out my phone and showed the board the messages she'd sent to Mikey, the ones trying to guilt him into silence. She contacted my son while he was in the hospital, after being explicitly told not to. The board members leaned in, reading the messages. One of them, the woman with steel gray hair from our first meeting, looked up sharply. "Miss Waters, is this your phone number?" She hesitated. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Finally, she nodded. "And you sent these messages to a student who was hospitalized after an incident involving you?" Another nod. The room was dead silent now. "I think we've heard enough," the board member said. "Miss Waters, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation." That's when she snapped. The tears stopped. Her face twisted into something ugly. "You have no idea what I've done for these boys," she hissed. "They needed me. They wanted my attention, especially Mikey. He pursued me." Her lawyer grabbed her arm, trying to shut her up, but she shook him off. "These parents are jealous," she continued, voice rising. "Jealous that their sons confided in me instead of them, that I understood them better than their own families." I felt sick, but I also felt vindicated. She was showing her true colors, and everyone could see it. Security moved in, escorting her out as she continued ranting. Her lawyer followed, probably already calculating how to minimize the damage. The room exploded into chaos again. It took an hour to restore order. The board announced a full investigation into Miss Waters' conduct. They promised to review all school policies regarding teacher-student interactions. Parents were given resources for counseling if their children needed it. As people filed out, the assistant teacher who'd warned me that first day caught my eye. She nodded once, a small smile on her face. I nodded back. Outside, the parent group gathered in the parking lot. We were exhausted, but relieved. It wasn't over. There would be investigations, possibly criminal charges, civil suits, but the first battle was won. "Thank you," Samantha said, hugging me, "for starting this, for not backing down." I thought about Mikey, still in the hospital, about all the other boys. "We all did this," I said, "together." Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The investigation uncovered more evidence. Other students came forward, former students too. The pattern went back years. Miss Waters was arrested 2 weeks after the board meeting. The charges were numerous and serious. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She'd avoid trial in exchange for a guilty plea and registration as an offender. She got 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. Not enough, in my opinion, but at least she'd never teach again. The school implemented sweeping changes, mandatory training for all staff, clear policies about teacher-student interactions, an anonymous reporting system for concerns. They even hired a counselor specifically trained in dealing with inappropriate conduct. Mikey came home after 3 weeks in the hospital. The physical recovery was straightforward. The emotional healing took longer. We found a good therapist, someone who specialized in helping kids process trauma. Some days were harder than others. One evening, about 2 months later, Mikey and I were working on a puzzle together. Out of nowhere, he said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I put down the piece I was holding." "For what, buddy?" "For not telling you about Miss Waters. For thinking it was special." I pulled him into a hug. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing that happened was your fault. You understand that, right?" He nodded against my shoulder. "My therapist says that too." "Your therapist is smart." We went back to the puzzle, but I could tell he had more to say. Finally, he asked, "Do you think the other kids are okay?" "I think they're getting help, just like you," I said. "Their parents are making sure of it." He placed another piece. Good. The parent group stayed in touch. We'd formed a support network, checking in on each other, sharing resources. Some families moved away, wanting a fresh start. Others, like us, stayed to see the changes through. Chris's son Jeremy struggled at first, but found solace in art therapy. Kit's boy joined a youth sports league, channeling his energy into something positive. Each child's journey was different, but none of them were alone. The assistant teacher who'd warned me that first day, she became the new head of student welfare. Turns out she'd been documenting concerns about Miss Waters for months, but hadn't been taken seriously. Now, she had the authority to make real changes. 6 months after everything started, I got a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Miss Waters, from prison. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened, but curiosity won. It was exactly what you'd expect. No real apology, just manipulation and blame. She was the victim. We'd ruined her life. She'd only wanted to help. The usual garbage. I showed it to my lawyer, who added it to the file, just in case she tried to cause trouble when she got out. A year later, Mikey started at a new school. We'd toured several, asked hard questions about their policies, their supervision, their commitment to student safety. The one we chose had an excellent reputation and, more importantly, transparent practices. His first day, I was a nervous wreck, but when I picked him up, he was smiling, really smiling, not the forced one he'd worn for months after the hospital. "How was it?" I asked. "Good," he said. "My teacher's nice and old, like grandma old." I laughed. It was the first time we'd been able to joke about teachers since everything happened. That night, as I tucked him in, Mikey asked, "Dad, do you think I'll ever forget about Miss Waters?" I sat on the edge of his bed. "I don't think we ever completely forget the hard things that happened to us," I said carefully. "But I think over time, time, they stop hurting so much. They become just one part of our story, not the whole thing. He thought about that. I hope so. Me too, buddy. Me too. 2 years have passed now. Mikey's doing well. He's got friends, good grades, interests beyond school. He still sees his therapist monthly, just to check in. The nightmares are rare now. The other families have moved on too, in their own ways. We don't talk as much anymore. Seeing each other brings back memories we'd rather leave behind, but we know we're there if needed. Miss Waters? She's still in prison. Her parole was denied last month. Apparently, she hadn't shown sufficient remorse or understanding of her actions. The parole board's report mentioned continued minimization of harm caused and failure to accept responsibility. The school where it all happened? They've become a model for child protection policies. Other schools send staff there for training. It's ironic. Out of something so terrible came real, lasting change. Sometimes I think about that day in the store, when I realized I was running late. How different things might have been if I'd been on time, if I'd picked Mikey up before, but I stopped myself. What ifs don't help anyone. What matters is that we survived. We protected our kids. We made sure it couldn't happen again. And slowly, day by day, we're all healing. The tree in Mikey's drawing, the one with the broken branch, he drew it again last week. This time, new growth was sprouting from where the branch had broken. Small, green, reaching toward the sun. That's us, he said when he showed me. Still growing. Yeah, I thought, still growing.